Welcome along to the latest Seahawks Draft Blog live stream. Rob and Adam here with you today. And Adam, this is going to be an interesting live stream because I'm going to talk about some of the things that I've heard this week. And as I've said in the description, I am not an insider. I am not Todd McShay. I am not speaking to employed NFL GMs and getting real sourced info from the people who are going to be the decision makers in this draft. But I've done this long enough to sort of get to know some people, as you have as well in the NFL. It's a little bit strange, I accept, that two blokes who are on the other side of the world have managed to do that. But it's just part of, I suppose, the industry and the way that it is. And at this time of the year, I'm generally able to sort of ask around different sources and try and find out little bits of information. So I'm going to share some of that, Adam. Are you ready for what I'm going to say, though?
Absolutely, but don't do yourself a disservice, Rob. They're all interesting to a point. I mean, sometimes a 7 draft round mock draft isn't always the most exhilarating for everyone, but every show is interesting.
Well, this one, I think will shed a bit of light maybe on in the draft. The Seahawks sphere is not really discussing as much because we're so focused on the offensive line that this is going to be maybe some other positions, some other players that don't get talked about as much from a Seahawks perspective. If you appreciate everything that we do, then send in a super chat. If you've got a question, send in a super chat and I will read it out on the screen. If there's anything that in particular that I'm talking about here and I see a super chat come in that is specific to that position or player, I will jump and go to it as quickly as we can. But as I'm going through each of these, Adam, I'm going to come to you for your reaction as a Seahawks fan as well and sort of get your thoughts on it. So
you're quite excited about this because you mentioned it in our little group chat a couple of days ago. Like last week, to pull back the curtain, we only really decided to do that stream a few hours beforehand. And then, we had a 2-hour mock draft and it was great. But this one has been planned for a couple of days now. So that's quite exciting. I'm looking forward to hearing spin a few yarns for me. Love it.
Yeah, you might not be as excited in a little while, but but here we go. So the first thing is just a general point that I want to share, Adam. And it's about how, not all teams, but just the mentality of teams when they are drafting. And, we talk about blue chip players and you've got to address this kind of position. You've got to create this kind of team. I think with a lot of teams, at least the ones that are not focusing on need, their mentality in the early rounds, in particular the first round, is you are aiming to draft starters. You are trying to draft players who are no one's going to be able to turn around in a few years and go, you drafted a bad player. Now that maybe sounds a little bit more defense than offense. You're not attacking things to try and get the amazing star player. But I think a lot of decision makers are that's their sort of mentality, and it's not a bad one. I want to draft players who are going to contribute to the football team, who are going to be worthy of a second contract, who are going to build the sort of foundation of the roster, not necessarily taking wild shots to try and get, flashy players who are going to flame out and not get to their second contract. And I think that's probably one of the lessons the Seahawks have learned over the years with some of the mistakes they've made. And it's why they seemingly have a focus on reliability, character, intelligence, trustworthiness early in the draft. And I think that's something that we really need to keep at the forefront of our mind when we go into this draft for the Seahawks. And also, I think the other point that I would make is that some evaluators place greater faith in testing than others. I don't know where the Seahawks are in that sort of spectrum, Adam, whether they are at the top end of we want traits, we want amazing upside. I definitely know there are evaluators who have a mentality of F the combine, and there are others who probably think it's useful or that the testing and the information is useful. I would suggest that the Seahawks probably are one of those teams who concentrate on testing. And the reason I'm sort of laying that out now is because I think there are some players in this draft who teams are going to think, not really that interested in. And 5 other teams will have a much higher rating on that same player because they put a lot more focus on testing. Bear that in mind when we get to Grae Zable. So the first thing I want to say, and you may have heard this, Adam.
Can I interject on a general point beforehand? Because I like to try and ask you general questions that like the common fan would have versus your knowledge. So I'm thinking of what you just said. They're looking to draft for, being reliable and, it's almost like don't mess it up, basically. And no one can look at you and say that was just a mistake, right? So I'm thinking about the Eagles, naturally, because they're the champions. And the last 2 first-round picks I can think of, Jalen Carter, which would probably go against that quite dramatically. But then someone like Cooper DeJean, where would you situate a pick like that? Because obviously you've got the very over-the-top sort of white cornerback discussion, which naturally is a bit of a meme and whatever. But it's worked out tremendously well. But do you think a pick like that, just so that I can try and frame, and hopefully the people watching can frame the whole discussion we're about to have around general sort of themes, would you consider that to be a high risk or a defensive pick? And I know that's a difficult question. It's not a 50-50 thing, but just as a general idea.
I would classify Cooper DeJean as a good pick, 40th overall. I think once you got to that range in the draft, it was more than acceptable for somebody to take a chance on him. There were people suggesting that maybe the Seahawks should take him at 16, and that felt a little bit rich to me. I still think it does. Even with the rookie season that he's had, I still think he benefits a lot from playing for the Eagles, and I wouldn't necessarily have wanted the Seahawks to take him at 16. However, I think when you get to 40, that's a good pick. With Jalen Carter, that is the best example of what I'm talking about in terms of who could take the risk. And it wouldn't surprise me, Adam, if 25 to 28 teams didn't have Jalen Carter on their board. And unless I'm mistaken, the Eagles were in 2 minds whether to do it as well. Like they were even, of all the teams, they were debating about it. And they felt because of the Georgia foundation that they'd already built, and because they had Fletcher Cox and Brandon Graham and still had Jason Kelsey when he was a rookie and Lane Johnson, that they had enough experience and leadership that they could afford to take a chance on a player like that. And they're probably good enough also to take a chance on a player who just does stuff that, would get players to be undrafted. And I'm not even talking about the legal stuff that emerged prior to him being drafted. I'm talking about other stuff, just application, attitude, mentality, professionalism, stuff like that. So they felt as if they could take a chance, and it's worked out for them. I don't think it would have worked out for a lot of other rosters in the same way. And that's why it annoys me when people revise history a little bit and say the Seahawks should have taken Jalen Carter, because no. So kudos to the Eagles. So the first thing I want to talk about is the interior defensive line. This is not a revelation. It's not breaking any news here. A lot of people have talked about this. I couldn't believe how positively, Adam, people were talking about these defensive tackles in this draft. The word that was used by one source was, it is incredible. Incredible, they said, was the defensive tackle group. The feeling is that there is going to be a high number of starters drafted in the first 3 rounds, and that we will probably look back in 5 years and be amazed at how many legit starters emerge from this class who play defensive tackle. And again, it's not a big shock. It is a deep defensive tackle class, Adam. But when you hear the word incredible used from people who don't usually go that far to describe positions and players, I thought it was interesting. And for that reason, I just wonder whether the Seahawks will take a defensive tackle in the first 3 rounds, that they will almost see that you have to do that. Even though they took Byron Murphy at 16 a year ago, I don't think they're going to take a defensive tackle at 18 before anybody goes down that road and starts pitching anything like that. But I just think maybe round 2, round 3, they might not be able to resist Adam taking a defensive tackle.
And that does tally with your mock draft from last week at 52, right? I think.
I put a defensive tackle at 52. Now, I put Ty Robinson there, and I'm a big Ty Robinson fan. I'm not sure he's going to go quite that early after this week of asking around. So I always retain the right to change my opinion. I'm not sure. I don't think he's going to go 52. But could Joshua Farmer go there? Could it be somebody else who goes in that kind of range? I think it's possible. But I just found it interesting. And someone has asked about Walter Nolan. I'm going to speak a bit about Walter Nolan in a bit. when I get into sort of certain players. This is more general position group, but the biggest amount of praise, defensive tackles, that's going to be the position of the draft. One other position that is often talked about in a very positive sense is running back class. I was surprised to hear people think it might be a bit overrated, that it's deep, but not necessarily loaded with quality. That maybe, the players that you, Ashton Genty aside, are not going to be unbelievable players. That maybe you're going to get some good players, and there might be multiples of good players who go, but not necessarily stars. I don't really think that impacts the Seahawks that much, Adam. But if anyone was kind of worrying, wow, really good running back class. John Schneider's gone on the record and already said really good running back class. Maybe he'll be tempted to take another one in the first 3 rounds. My take on that is probably won't happen, Adam. Probably more of a later round thing, if at all. If that is how the league feels, that it's deep, but not top heavy, not rich in terms of stars at the front. So I think the people who don't want the Seahawks to go anywhere near that position might be able to, if they were worrying, might be able to breathe a sigh of relief.
Look, it depends what, we're going to talk about starting worthy. And I don't know where you draw your line on at what point do the picks become sort of crapshoots and you're not, if they make it, great. If they don't, then you're not worried about the value. I would have been stunned and probably disappointed if this was a draft that the Seahawks used a pick that you're banking on contribution on a running back. Unless they're going to trade Kenneth Walker, which doesn't seem realistic, and you've got Chardonnay and you've got Kenny McIntosh. This doesn't feel like the year that you can be investing serious resources in that position. And I think most people would be quite pissed off if they did. Like if it was one of the 3rd round picks, if you turn the Geno Smith pick into a running back, for example, I get the impression people would be quite frustrated with that.
I think day 3, they possibly will take one. And I think day 3 in general is when you kind of get to the crapshoot range, where you're maybe not high 4, but late 4, which is where the Seahawks are picking onwards. It does kind of get to a point of, let's take a chance on this guy. Let's take a chance on that. I think in the first 3 rounds, you're really looking for people who are going to contribute, who could be long-term fixtures in your team. So I do think they could take one later on, maybe use that to advantage. Maybe a player falls who they have like a 3rd round grade or a 4th round grade, but is there in 5 or 6, and they take them there. I do think they've got a big decision coming with Ken Walker. I don't think it's automatic that they're just going to pay to keep Ken Walker. He hasn't been able to stay healthy. Zach Charbonnet, I think, if anything, I think he showed at the end of last year that he's maybe a better lead runner than Ken Walker. That if you play through him, your offense might be more of the style you want. And it just makes you wonder what Ken Walker's future is. Do they go and get a cheap second version of Zach Charbonnet? Because there are players like that who can run through contact in this draft, but I just don't think it's going to happen early. So I hope that maybe is reassuring. Okay, offensive line class. It's fine, was the general feedback. And perhaps people might be hoping that in a stream like this, Adam, they would get a better review than it's fine when the Seahawks obviously want to build a great offensive line. Not great. No top-level players was the description at the top end. And then another thing a source said to me was that everyone wants twitch and athleticism, but smarts, toughness, and size, actual big men up front are considered even more vital. And getting to know a lineman and what makes them tick and their personalities and their attitudes and finding those sort of character fits as you build 5 individuals who can essentially do one of the hardest jobs in the NFL, which is just, have people run into you for the whole game and you don't get to rotate like the defensive line. So that was sort of the feeling there. My thought as I was coming away from that is, I think it's interesting that Sean McVay, as a zone blocking coach, who's come from the Shanahan system, has reverted to big men. Big. Has kind of hybrided his offensive line and gone away from smaller athletic linemen. Yet the Seahawks seem to be doing the opposite. They seem to be going with athleticism. At least what they're saying athletes, run to the second level. Now, maybe they're going to con us all here, Adam, but it does seem as if they're going with old school zone blocking and are going to look for old school zone blockers. But I thought that was interesting because that kind of flies in the face of what Seattle's going to do here. It looks as if anything, they're going to look for twitch, athleticism, quickness, ability to get to the second level very quickly, aggressive second level play. But what one source was saying was size, physicality, toughness, maybe some things more aligned with the gap concepts. It should be at the forefront of what you're doing.
Yeah, a couple of things to say on that. I mean, we don't need the whole offensive line class to be great. We just need to find one or two players that can be good for us. So if the rest of them are crap and we get the two good ones, that's an absolutely fine class for me. I generally am very wary in sport of any team coach that is so fixated on a system that they refuse to waver. And that comes from me watching it in the flesh in the last couple of years. And when you need to make any adjustments, it becomes very difficult to do that. And I am a little bit wary that, obviously Clint Kubiak is a good offensive coordinator thus far. I don't think he's ever had a top 10 offense. That's not to hold it against him, but that's just, it's obviously not wizardry that he's performing because it's never manifested itself into the top level. Maybe it will in Seattle. Hopefully it will. But I am slightly concerned that there's a lot of names that are just being tossed out because it doesn't fit the scheme. And I'm always a little bit wary of that when you're discounting good players in inverted commas because they don't fit this system that, look, in an ideal world, the system works fine, but the other team get to scheme against you. And there's times where you may have to make adjustments. Now, obviously, zone blocking is going to be the kind of thing that carries you through. But it really does concern me the number of people that have just flippantly just said, well, it doesn't fit the scheme. And so we'll just leave him to one side when he could be a good player. And like in a way, I feel like we've heard this a few times in Seattle recently where coaches brought in, they bring their system, they sort of get players for that coach. It doesn't quite work out as you want. You then change it because, well, that didn't work. So we'll go from A to B, but you're left with all the players that suit A. And there is a bit of me, and I was speaking to someone on the Seattle beat that was suggesting that, Schneider's kind of setting people up, his coordinators up for a bit of failure here with this, so fixated on scheme and system that it's quite easy to say, well, we gave you the guys for your system. It didn't work out. So it's your fault, as opposed to we just didn't get good enough players. So that's what slightly concerns me with the offensive line thing that, we've already let the whole of free agency go on offensive line for one reason or another. And, not all scheme, there's money and whatever, and that's completely fine. But like at some point you do have to take good players. And that's a bit of a worry for me at this stage.
See, I have a slightly different feel to it because I think they've kind of had a bit of a mixed bag of sort of, it's been almost a collection of parts rather than 5 individuals who all fit the same scheme. So Charles Cross is a finesse pass blocking left tackle. Abe Lucas is a very aggressive, physical, tone setting right tackle. Anthony Bradford is an enormous human being. Lomea is not. Christian Haynes has a very unorthodox body shape, which is not natural to NFL. Oluwatimi is kind of in the middle between, he's not very athletic, but he's not sort of that big hulking center. And yet Connor Williams was classic zone blocker and Jalen Sundell is more of a classic zone blocker. So they've kind of just had a bunch of guys. And, are you a gap? If you looked just at the personnel on Seattle's roster, you couldn't tell whether they're a zone or a gap team, whether they want to run the ball or whether they want to pass protect. It's kind of like a mix of everything. And it is a little bit appealing to me to have, if you've got 5 guys who fit zone blocking and then you zone block, that might be what Seattle's been lacking for all of these years. Just having a system and actually having the players who can do the bloody system. And not having a right guard who is 340 pounds and wants to hammer people, but then when he's injured, having Lomea come in. Like that doesn't make any sense to me. So I kind of understand a little bit the thought process there. My concern is a little bit that if you want to fix an offensive line, do you want to go all in on one system and say that is a lot of responsibility on the coaches? That is a huge sort of, you've got to make this work with these guys. And if it doesn't work, then what do? You're forced to then go and get another zone blocking offensive line coach and coordinator, whether you were John Schneider making that decision or anybody else, by the way, or do you blow everything up again? And you've invested in that kind of a line. So it's quite hard to sort of know what exactly they should do. Should they copy McVay? Should they have a classic Shanahan offensive line? And what does a classic Shanahan offensive line even mean anymore when they're drafting Aaron Banks in round 2 and then Matt LaFleur's paying $19.25 million a year for him to go and play in Green Bay? And he's not a zone blocker naturally in terms of his physical profile. So I just think again, I said this on the stream on the podcast I've just done with Bryce. I think trying to fix the offensive line and wanting the Seahawks to fix the offensive line is a bit like saying wanting the Seahawks to have a franchise quarterback. We all want it. How you actually get there is quite challenging and difficult. And I don't know if I've got the answers, and I just hope that they do. But I think we might be setting ourselves up here for an interesting conversation after day one, which I'm going to come on to in a minute.
Yeah, I guess for me, it's like, hypothetically, you've got the 49ers and Robert Saleh has developed a system where his defense are the number one defense in the league against a zone blocking offensive line, hypothetically. But against every other sort of blocking system, they rank 32nd. Are you still going to be a zone blocking team? And I'm massively stretching the realities of the situation here. I agree, but allow me to sort of meet myself in the middle here. And you know what I'm trying to say, because there is nothing worse, in my opinion, in sport than watching your team so fixated on a system, despite the fact that you're sort of playing into the opponent's hands, when a couple of tweaks here and there might make you far more productive. So I guess that's where that's where my hesitancy comes when it comes to them talking about players who do or don't fit the scheme. It's great if you can just do your own thing every time, but the other team gets a scheme against you too. So what are you going to do if adjustments are made on the other side that make it harder for you to do what you step onto the field intending to?
Yeah, I understand that. And then the other thing is on Tyler Booker. I mean, I'll just cut to Tyler Booker now. I'll jump ahead a little bit. So Tyler Booker was described to me as a good football player. Just needed to improve his first step. Sort of quickness was the idea. It was said it was 50-50 whether he could work in zone, but you wouldn't naturally set out to draft him for a zone system. And the feeling was that if this was like 30 years ago, he'd be like a top 10 pick, because that's the kind of player that everyone would, maybe not because he's a guard, but you know what, the whole league would want him because that's old school football. And the thing with Tyler Booker is, if you put Tyler Booker in, he may not end up being, I don't know, I'm trying to think, like superstar interior offensive linemen don't really exist, do they? No one's going to turn around in 10 years and say, Tyler Booker, wow. He's like an elite player who is one of the best ever to do it. But I think in 10 years, what you'll probably find is that he's had a really good career, has been a really solid player, and contributed on a decent offensive line for one or multiple teams when he's finished. And right now, you kind of think, well, from a Seahawks perspective, they can't get the offensive line right. They're constantly recycling through their interior positions every single year. Would it really be the worst thing in the world to have a guard who is just going to play at a good level for a few years, who might just be a good guard? I don't know. But then you also have to balance that out with, how early do you want to take a player with that description? Do you want to take a player with that description 18th overall? Or do you want to wait until 50 and 52 and round 3, when you might be able to get a player who can do that at a value that you think is more reasonable? These are the kind of things you have to balance out, because some fans will say, just take the offensive lineman. I'm sick of the offensive line being an issue. But if you are an actual GM with your job on the line, and you've spent the last 2 years building your draft board for this class, and you look up there and you see a whole bunch of guards that have got similar grades to the guy that you're taking at 18, and then you see a different player at a different position with a much higher grade, and you don't take that player, and that player goes on to be freaking awesome, you've got to live with that. And that's hard. And people will criticize you for that as well, Adam. So it is hard. It's not easy to do this.
This is going to be a really hard question, and it's probably unfair of me to ask you, but I'll try because you'll manage to work it out. So if I guaranteed you that everyone in the draft played to 8 out of 10 of the potential that you've graded them at pre-draft. So, if you've got them as a 10 out of 10, they're going to be an 8 out of 10 player. I know that they only go up to 7, but 8 out of 10 per expectation. What 3 positions are you going to pick in order 18, 50, and 52?
Well, if everybody...
everyone in the draft.
Well,
so so everyone's going to be good.
Yeah. I mean, given that I have quarterbacks graded in round 2, I'm going to say quarterback then.
Okay.
I would say...
Who would it be?
Oh no, I'm not going to go there.
No, but it's this draft, right? So you've got to. It's not just every player in history. It's
any of
right now.
Any of the quarterbacks that I've got graded in round 2. Then.
Okay, so you think that if you play 8 out of 10 of a round 2 potential, that's good enough to be as a quarterback? Yeah,
to be the 18th pick.
Okay,
because second round has got a chance to start. And then I think you would. I'm just going to list the premium positions here. That's the thing. Like that's I'm going to list the premium positions because that's what you want. If you can guarantee a quality quarterback, a quality edge rusher,
but you're still getting the 50th best player in this draft because everyone knows.
Yeah, I that's just it. I think if I think that's the problem with the premise is that if everyone's 8 out of 10, if I've got a second round quarterback, I'll take that at 18 because I know I'm going to get a really good quarterback at 18 if it's a second rounder who's 8 out of 10. And likewise, I'm guessing there's players on my board who are fringe second rounders or full second rounders who will be there on the offensive line at 50, who I would take, and at pass rusher, who I would take. So that's that. So those are the 3 positions I would go for.
Fair. So you're just taking out wide receiver from what you sort of mocked last week, which makes sense. You end up with a quarterback, an offensive guard, and a pass rusher, which I think we'd be thrilled with if that kind of happened anyway.
Yeah. Well, I'm getting my 8 out of 10 receiver in round 4 or 3. So
okay,
because I've got a lot of receivers, so it's and some of them I will go later than I've got them graded. Anyway, so I've talked a bit about Tyler Booker, that good football player. And I did think it was interesting that it was described as 50-50 whether he can work in zone, but it was also said you wouldn't draft him specifically to, we're a zone team, Tyler Booker. But I'm loath to rule it out completely, but the testing is an issue. But it's you also have to think about the character and the influence, and that is so big for the Seahawks. You just wonder how that impacts them and their grade. If they think he's going to come in and revolutionize the whole unit with his presence, that could elevate his grade. But the sort of the feeling tends to be that the testing has knocked him backwards and that it's too much and that he can't play zone and that he is just going to be a phone booth guy because he can't move. I don't know if that's entirely fair, but it is what it is. Other linemen to receive good reviews from the people I've spoken to were Donovan Jackson, the Ohio State guard, Josh Simmons, the Ohio State left tackle, who has got some character issues, I believe. So probably is not likely to be taken by Seattle. Tate Ratledge, who was really well liked and was described as a late second, third rounder. I think he could be somebody who, if the Seahawks don't go guard in round 1, could be an option for them. But I think there's going to be a lot of teams that like Tate Ratledge in that sort of second half of round 2, early round 3 range. And the other problem with him is I just wonder whether Ratledge is a good zone blocker. Again, we're going back to that because on tape, he played in a phone booth a lot and he did do some zone, but he didn't do a lot of it. And I know there are some people who think he's better in gap. So I don't know how that will influence the Seahawks. Josh Connolly Jr. was given a good review. And then there were some names that I am not high on who got good reviews from the people I spoke to. That included Cameron Williams at Texas, who I have to say I really struggled with last season because he was just like a turnstile at right tackle. However, perhaps liked more in the league than I like him.
He sounds perfect. A turnstile for the offensive line. He'll fit right in.
Oh, he was awful at right tackle at the end of the season. Now, he was carrying an injury, that has to be said. But I mean, I in conversations about him, I said, well, can you put him at guard? And I got pushback from that and said, well, why would you do that? I was like, well, because of the games, he really struggled. He would get getting beat. But I think maybe the injury is the thing that is, and what I will say for him is he is a dude. He is a dude. Like his attitude, he's kind of like got the personality of an offensive lineman that you would want. And he's a good zone. And he's got good zone grades. So I do. Part of me wonders a little bit whether you move him to left guard or right guard, and you take away the Jermaine Ifedi defending the edge stuff, then maybe that would work. But he was mentioned as a tackle to me. Wyatt Millam got a better review than I expected, and he got a very good zone blocking grade. He's not a natural fit because of the athleticism limitations, but he's tough as nails, and he got a good review. He could be somebody they look at round 3, round 4. Jonah Savanaia got a good review. I don't think he finishes. I don't think he's anywhere near aggressive enough. I still wish he'd punched somebody at the Senior Bowl just to show that he had it in him. But he got a better review than I expected, and so did Jonah Monheim, who I have just think is, a run-of-the-mill, have them in every draft center. He got a good review. So I'm just passing that on because some of those players are not players that I have been rating very highly. And it speaks to maybe some of the fact that there are players that maybe the Seahawks will like better than I do. Rounds 2, 3, 4, as opposed to maybe 18.
How do you process that information as it pertains to the analysis that you give from here on in? Because you've watched all the tape, you've done as much research as you can. You're now talking to people that maybe have closer insight, but I don't know. Steve Smith Sr. is an analyst on the NFL sometimes, and I think he talks bollocks every time he's on. So I wouldn't take what he says as particular gospel. How do you use that information?
You have to be very careful with it, because I've had these conversations in previous years where I've said, what do you think of this player? In my mind, I know on my board, he's top 40. And I've got back, he's going to go in round 4. And then he goes in the top 40, and I was right. And I think, well, I didn't expect that. But everyone's opinions are different. And just because the opinion has come from someone who has far more experience and expertise and qualifications than I do, it doesn't mean that they're right. So what the best thing to do is to go back and look again at those players, which I will do over the next few weeks, and watch them again and just think, is there anything I've missed, in the mindset of do not just think that they're right. Try and work it out for yourself. And I'll go, and you have to try and be honest with yourself. And it's an internal battle in your own mind because you naturally just want to find the positive things to think, oh, I missed that. They're now better than I thought. But there's little things like with Savanaia, for example. I know when I put on the tape, I'm still going to see him not finish. I'm still not going to see enough of an aggressive streak. I'm still going to see a player that played right tackle and is going to have to shift into guard. And I don't think has got the natural tools to do that brilliantly at a high level. I think he's going to be very, very average at the next level. But I'm hearing from multiple people a more positive review than I've given him. So I have to go back and have a look. Grae Zable was described as, and this is the thing that might interest some people, he is what he is. And this is a player that I think a lot of people have put a ring round for the number 18 overall pick. He was described as someone who would not be a good pick in round 1. And I think that, again, comes down to the testing. I think, and the scheme. Now, if you look at Grae Zable through the eyes of, we're a zone blocking team. You can see all of the things you want from a zone blocker in Grae Zable. If you take it on a step further and say, I pay attention to testing, and you see someone who's got the explosive traits of Tristan Wirfs and the agility of Nate Solder, who are both high picks, it's hard for me to think this player will fail. I think he's a good scheme fit, and he's got the upside and the potential to justify being taken at 18. But if you don't care about testing, and if you're not tied to the zone blocking scheme, Adam, I can see why some teams and some evaluators have him rated lower. And if you look at Todd McShay, he's got him like 33. And I think Brugler's got him in the 30s. And I think Daniel Jeremiah's got him in, I think, like the early 30s. That tends to be where a lot of the analysts have put him, sort of very end of the first, early second, not 18 overall. So the big question then comes, do the Seahawks think he's worth 18 overall? Or do they agree with that analysis and that he's only worth, say, the 35th pick? And if that's the case, will they take somebody else, possibly at a different position, whose grade matches up closer to being taken with the 18th pick? That's what I want to find out.
If in that hypothetical situation, would you, two-part question, would you prefer they stuck at 18 and picked someone and saw what happened to them? Or would you prefer they drafted back to try and get some extra stuff and get him? And do you think, same question, do you think they will? And do you think they would?
I'd happily see them trade back, because I want more picks in this class anyway. Like if they could get, like I really like the idea of getting the Giants trading up and giving you a third rounder or something this year and maybe something next year, like a third next year. That's the trade that Todd McShay pitched. I really, really like that. But if that's not there, I probably would move down a few spots if I thought I could get him and get a fourth rounder or something like that. If that's what it has to be, then I would do that. I'm happy to take Grae Zable. I think Grae Zable, you plug him in. I've just seen a comment and it triggers me every freaking time, and I can't help it. I see a comment sometimes and I'm going to have to jump in, and it's this. I'm going to put it up on the screen. I will get to the super chat shortly. Zable doesn't have good tape versus good players and teams. It is the stupidest. I'm sorry, Columbo Laos. It is the stupidest point. Will you please stop making it? Because it is a point you've made before. Like there are countless players from Alabama and Oklahoma and Ohio State who fail, who are playing in the Big 12 and the Big 10 and the SEC. Do you know what there is also? A ton of players from North Dakota State who've worked out who play offensive line, including Cody Morks, the last one, who is doing very, very well for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. It's not, you are focusing too much on the logo and not enough on the player. Watch the tape. Who did they play in their first game last year? It was Colorado. It wasn't Seattle University, They played Colorado. And they've got a history of developing offensive linemen. He played really well against Colorado. So you watch the tape. And then, by the way, his testing is unbelievable. He's one of the highest upside linemen to enter the league in years. And then he played well at the Senior Bowl not in the 1v1s, in the scrimmages. He played well. I mean, come on. It triggers me every time, Adam. North Dakota State is pretty much O-line U at the moment. So I'm not having that. So I diverted that. I would happily take Grae Zable at 18. I think he's one of those players who is an obvious, he has a chance to be really good. And I'm ready for the Seahawks to have a really good guard. And I think if you change the offensive line coach in 2 years, I don't think he would be like, oh no, I'm not doing a zone anymore. I think he could do a gap, he could do all of that stuff. So I'm not worried about that. So I think he is a good choice. And no, Christian Haynes was not the best player of the Senior Bowl next year. Colombo, please stop. Anyway, I need to stop looking at the comments.
It sends the right message as well, right? I think we've said before, no one is going to have a go at the Chicago general manager if the offensive line doesn't perform particularly well next year, because at least they sort of just did the obvious thing. And if Joe Tooney doesn't play well next year, well, it was Joe Tooney. Like, why wouldn't he have played well? And at some point, you've just got to stop faffing and just take the guy that is obvious. And it doesn't always need to be clever. You don't always have to be the smartest guy in the room. You can just take the player that everyone thinks you should. And there's good reason for them to think that. And I think this really does feel like that draft where it's going to come to a head if they don't do that and it goes wrong.
I don't really agree with that, because I think for them, they should only take Zable if the board says they should take Zable. If Zable is, I'll go back to the sort of the grading thing I used last time. If he's a 6.38 and they've got a 6.50 on their board, they can't take Zable. Like you have to take the player who is far higher graded on your board. And that is especially the case if you then have players who are 6.30s who are going to be there at 50 and 52. It's the combo picks. You have to look at it that way. You have to say, okay, I've got 3 picks in the top 52. What's my bundle look like? Because if I take Zable there, that's fine. Yeah, we've addressed that need. But am I going to get, if Malachi Starks is there at 18, they ain't going to be a safety as good as him there. Am I better off taking Starks here and then taking Tate Rowledge at 50? Is that a better duo? And does that fit more along the board than Zable and somebody who's not as good in terms of the grade 50? The minute that you start deviating from that just to say, well, we're taking a lineman just because, that is when you can run into trouble. That's when you end up with LJ Collier, who I liked. So I'm qualified to sort of say that. I liked LJ Collier going into the draft. I understand why he failed, but I liked his tape. So I think they've got to be careful with that. If Zable's in a bunch of players at 18 with a similar grade, Adam, I think you take him. But if there's a player who's got a much bigger grade, I think you have to take that player, personally.
Yeah, look, obviously, I agree with you in that point. I guess where we differ is that my faith in their board and their analysis is probably at rock bottom at this stage. And for me, like, the board was what gave them Penny over Nick Chubb, for example, and D. Eskridge when Creed Humphrey was there. So I know that I'm really talking like the generic, million numbers after your name fan on Twitter with just,
Do you know what? I think they had Nick Chubb ahead of Rashad Penny on their board. And I think Schottenheimer convinced them not to.
Oh, interesting. I guess I'm so bereft of confidence with the draft strategy thus far that my just general fandom, which is probably superseding my podcast ahead at this point, just wants me to take the effing player. And look, that's a really basic way to put it, and you probably deserve better analysis than that on this stream. But that's where I am, and I can't help it.
Yeah, Schottenheimer was at Georgia when Chubb was at Georgia, and there was a feeling that Schottenheimer was really pushing for Penny and not for Chubb, and they took Penny because of Schottenheimer's influence there. I don't know who was higher on the board, but it's kind of like loads of people refer to all the time that the Seahawks whiffed on that in a bad way, and their process was not good. And I think it's one of the reasons why they've adjusted they've really honed in on the board since that, and obviously Malik McDowell and some other things have meant that they've kind of switched up how they do things. Anyway, receivers. The receiver class is considered good, with a lot of depth. A player who I am not a huge fan of. I don't dislike the player. I'm just not a huge fan of his. Tetero McMillan was touted as likely to be the first drafted, which contradicts a lot of the stuff like Todd McShay saying it's going to be golden. The sources that I speak to are saying McMillan will be the first receiver taken. Here's one of the big things that I wanted to talk about today, Adam, and might be the most inflammatory thing that we're going to talk about today. I did not realize this, but my eyes have been opened. I don't think people realize just how liked Emeka Egbuka is in the NFL, the receiver at Ohio State. So one of the people I spoke to said he was the guy at Ohio State. Think of all the players on that team. You've got Geno Smith's cousin. You've got Will Howard. You've got the two pass rushers. You've got Type Williams in the middle. You've got all of the defensive backs with quality. You've got those two running backs. You've got defensive linemen, two of which are going to go in the top 45. Emeka Egbuka was the guy. The one that everybody looked up to. The one who exemplified the spirit of that team. The one who won all of the 1v1s in basketball between the players. Whether it was grit, physicality, quality, maturity, dedication, application, production, Egbuka was the main man. And the way he was talked about in the conversations I had made me think, one, this guy's going to go a lot earlier than most think. And two, I would not be surprised if he's on Seattle's radar with the 18th overall pick next month. Thoughts on that?
I don't know why. When you were talking, I started thinking about Laquan Treadwell, who was at Ole Miss, wasn't he? He broke his neck before being drafted, and I still
no, that was DK.
No, I'm sure Laquan Treadwell got an absolute battering in the end zone in a massive game because I was watching it.
He might have done that. DK definitely broke his neck before.
Maybe it wasn't a broken neck, but I'm sure there was. Someone will be in the chat reminding me that I'm sure he came into the NFL with injury concerns, which may slightly.
He did have some injury concerns, yeah, going into the draft. He definitely had that.
And I just remember, like, the chat around him being like he was just the greatest person to ever enter the draft, and he was so good at this and that and that and that. I think it was a broke. I think he really badly broke his leg. Scoring a touchdown.
Are you? I think you might be thinking of somebody else because that's not Laquan Treadwell.
Who got taken by the Vikings quite high, and he spent a bit of time in Seattle. I'm sure it was an Ole Miss player, or maybe it was. Anyway, that's.
It definitely wasn't Treadwell. Treadwell was not considered.
The last comment from Dilligaff. I'm sure he went to the Vikings and got traded. And from memory, it was all about his personality and whatever. And I'm always just wary about guys like that in general because they don't talk about the actual talent and ability.
I just want to jump in because I don't think they are anything like each other as players. I mean, for starters,
I don't mean that as players, but I mean in the way that they're talked about as sort of the be all and end all guy. Sure. And I just don't like that chat about people that elevates them up the board at this level.
Well, first of all, talking about him being the guy is not just about leadership and maturity. It's also about physical quality. Like the basketball comment was chucked in for a reason. You know, he jumped a 38-inch vertical. He ran a 4.40. You know, I mean, for the purposes of just, you should have mentioned this, Treadwell ran a 4.63 and jumped a 33.5-inch vertical. We're talking about totally different athletes here. The player comparisons who come up with Emeka Egbuka are people like Amon-Ra St. Brown. And he's an elite player. Better than Jackson Smith-Njigba is something that gets chucked about. And there's a feeling that he is a lot better. Like, people have misunderstood him because he's played with Marvin Harrison Jr. and Smith-Njigba in the past. Actually, I think he played when Smith-Njigba was injured. And then this year, obviously, with Geno's cousin, all the attention's been on other players. He is really, really highly rated in the league. And after I heard this, I kind of thought, okay, I need to go and see what people are saying about him. And then it made sense. Daniel Jeremiah moved him up to 17th on his last big board. He moved him up like 8 places. He's hearing the same stuff. Tony Pauline did an article I'm friends with Tony. I won't hear bad words said against him. I know that that I've talked about him recently. Like, he puts a lot of stuff out, and a lot of it's rumors. He perhaps speaks a bit too matter-of-factly about these rumors, and people then criticize him, and he's just passing on like what league people tell him. He wrote an article this week saying some people in the league think a wide receiver run starts at number 18 with Seattle, and that's the kind of range where Egbuka will go. I'm just saying that this is the kind of player the Seahawks take. This is the mentality, the character, everything about his mental makeup will appeal to them. And they are going to draft a receiver at some point. And when I'm talking about players who are graded, they might get up to this position at 18 and think, we need to come out. We need to have this guy. He's so highly rated. We believe he's got so much of a ceiling and an incredible floor as well that we can't miss with this guy. He is going to be like a top player for our system and our team. And he's going to elevate the toughness in a position that naturally you wouldn't do that at receiver, and the quality with this player. I just wonder whether they might go with this. And here's another thing I would throw in as well. One of their big things over the last few weeks is we want players who want to be here. And DK didn't, so he's gone. And there was a barb on the way out the door. You don't want to be here, off you go. Geno Smith, you don't want to be here, off you go. We'll get Sam Darnold in and we'll give him DK's number. We'll give Chenna Nwosu Geno Smith's number. They want to be here. Chenna Nwosu took a pay cut to stay. Mika Egbuka is an enormous Seahawks fan. He's from Washington. He will love to play for the Seattle Seahawks. I'm not saying that that's why you draft somebody. I'm just saying it's another wrinkle to this whole thing. If they take Egbuka at 18, the internet is going to explode. And people are going to go, I cannot believe they have taken this player in the top 20, that he's not exciting enough, and that he's not an offensive lineman. They're going to go nuts. But I want to talk about it now. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm just saying that it could happen, and that he's the kind of player they would draft, and he's the kind of player that in the league, everybody loves him. There's rave reviews about him as a person and as a player. And when I heard Amon-Ra St. Brown this week, I'm thinking, well, that's unexpected, because that's a top player. And people saying they need, I've seen it in the comments now, they need a different type of receiver. They don't need another one of these types of receivers. Go and have a look at the Shanahan system. They don't have DK Metcalfs in their system. They have players like this. Like the Rams had Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua. They didn't have a DK Metcalf. These are the kind of receivers that this offense utilizes. So if you had an offense with Egbuka, Kupp, and Smith and Jigba, Sam Darnold might, yeah, you've got to improve the line. I get that. Sam Darnold will have a chance, I think, to reproduce his numbers from last year with that. And I'm not trying to talk myself into this. I'm just sort of trying to explain my thought process, because I knew when I came on here and talked about this particular angle of this, people were going to go balmy. But I think there's a chance that Egbuka could be Seattle's pick.
I'm not going to go balmy at you at all. I was speaking to someone who sort of flippantly said, yeah, they have to go wide receiver and guard with their first two picks. And he just sort of threw that out there. And I thought, oh, do you mean guard then wide receiver? He said, no, be happy if they took wide receiver at 18, and there'll be enough guys there at 50. And as someone I super respect their opinion. And so I was surprised by how at ease he would be with the way that it would go, starting with the receiver at 18. So I'd certainly rather take a receiver than another defensive tackle, for example, at 18, or probably any defensive player at 18. I think it has to be offensive. I think you've got a defensive guru as a head coach who should hopefully elevate players from pick 50 to, worthy of being an 18th pick. And yeah, I there's certainly not going to be any fireworks coming back from me if that's the way it happens. I'd be pissed off if it's a defensive player, but if it's a receiver and the process makes sense, then I think that's pretty valid.
Yeah, I think we all know what the reaction will be if it happens, and it will be an ugly scene. But I do think there is that sort of what was suggested there, receiver, guard, then maybe defensive line with the first three picks. it feels, or even maybe 2 offensive linemen, I don't know. It feels somewhat plausible. It feels plausible because although it's a deep class of receivers, they might just really like Egbuka. And he's their kind of guy. And I think the way that he tested the other day might have been the finishing touches to that, because he showed, no, I am a good athlete. I mean, you've got to be a good athlete, haven't you, to end up as a 5-star recruit by Ohio State. So which he was, and they recruited him out of Washington State. So he's ended up being that. So I think Seahawks fans, I'm not saying that I'm going to put him in 18 in every mock between now and April, but I might put him in the next one at 18. And I'm throwing it out there. And if it happens, we can look back on this conversation on the 30th of March and go, oh, yeah. But there's other players that they could take as well. But that is one name that I wanted to chuck out today.
I think also, like, the defense was good last year. And they probably have enough. Now, enough is never enough in the NFL, but with injuries or whatever. But, if the season happens to start tomorrow, God forbid, there's enough on defense that you would think could be playoff caliber. There's nowhere near enough on offense. I mean, it's a really reductive way to look at it, but that there's obviously one side of the ball. I mean, as it should be, given the resources that have been plundered into the defense over the last 2 to 3 years, that there's enough there that you can close one eye and squint with the other and see a really, really good defense there, particularly with the head coach you brought in. So, it's a basic way to look at it, but I don't think it would be, I wouldn't be gutted if they used all 3 of their first picks on offense.
The other name that because obviously I've watched a lot of videos about Emeka Egbuka in the last 24 hours, 48 hours, because this is, I feel like I wanted to be prepared for discussing this. I've seen a few other people say Chris Godwin as a comparison for him. And that's another really good receiver. That's somebody who's had a really good career with Tampa Bay. He's had, I think, 3 contracts now, has been extremely productive, would be the number 1 receiver on most teams. The only reason he isn't is because Mike Evans is there. I suppose you can argue the toss as to whether Mike Evans makes his life easier or not, but the Seahawks have Jackson Smith-Njigba. So, again, I just think there's a chance. And if you get Amon-Ra, if you get 75% of Amon-Ra St. Brown over the next 6 years, no one's going to say that's a bad pick. No one's going to say it's a bad pick. And they have lost Tyler Lockett, not just DK Metcalf. And I think people need to realize how renowned Tyler Lockett was within that building. And not having his consistency, reliability, and character in that building, I think they may want to replace that and may see Egbuka as the perfect person to do it. So just throwing it out.
Rightly or wrongly, DK Metcalf basically sacked off his Seahawk career because he was pissed off at how Tyler Lockett was treated. And that came from him.
Yeah.
So whether you believe it or not, and it doesn't need to actually be true, if that's the perception, that's all that actually matters with these guys. So that goes to show how important a guy he was.
Indeed. Next one's going to be quite interesting as well. This is this is going to be interesting. This is not a Seahawks one though, really, because I don't think this is going to happen. The expectation, and we'll see if this ends up being true, is that Will Howard will go in the 2nd round, the quarterback at Ohio State. And one source told me they wouldn't be surprised if he sneaks into the very last few picks of round 1. So let me stress, this wasn't someone telling me they graded him in round 1 or even in round 2. This was somebody telling me they think it could still happen despite that. And the basis for this is he achieved a lot at Ohio State. I think that the league has sort of looked at how he came back from that Michigan loss, led them into the playoffs, was practically perfect in the playoffs in 4 tough games. Oregon, Notre Dame. Who else did they beat? You get the picture. Like, they beat a lot of good teams. And his QBR was nearly perfect, which is virtually impossible. And he did it. So teams are kind of thinking, not that he's somebody who's going to come in and be Josh Allen, but that, hey, we're a team, we need a quarterback. And here's the team that I think might do this, the Jets. The Jets have come from a system who, Jared Goff is not elite, amazing. I know he's the 1st overall pick back in the day. He's not an amazing, incredible player, but that team has worked because of Jared Goff. And I just wonder if the Jets take somebody like Tyler Warren at 7. That feels very like a good match there. And then they think, we need this guy. We're going to trade into 31-32 to get him. Or they just stick and take him in round 2. That you've got the Raiders in round 2. Chip Kelly was there at Ohio State and coached him. That's another option. The Jets might think they've got to get ahead of Vegas if they really want him. And I'm just chucking names out. I'm not saying, no one said anything to me about the Jets or the Raiders. I'm just pitching this out there. But this player could go earlier than people think. He was called a good player who can develop into a starter in the league. Maybe not a top starter, but a good player. So, yeah, keep an eye on Will Howard in the top 50 and potentially, maybe, outside chance, he sneaks into the back end of round 1. And before anybody jumps down my throat, if he goes like 65th or something, or 55th, I'm not saying he's going to definitely go in round 1. I'm saying there's talk that round 2 seems pretty secure. Maybe round 1. Maybe.
I mean, you can see why a general manager would, when they're checking off the boxes of what they want from a quarterback. As you say, he was perfect in the 4 biggest games of his life so far. And, winners win ultimately, particularly at that position. And you can see why a general manager would think, well, if we've got that part of him sorted, we know he's not going to freeze in the big moment, and he can, keep cold head and just do what needs to be done. Whether you like him or not as a player, you can see why that would be an alluring trait for a manager to say, well, if we've got that, then we can pair him with these players, that coach, and make something work. I don't think, and in that position, quarterback particularly, it's so worth a punt if it comes off. You're not using number 1 overall pick on a guy, but I can see why that would happen. I don't. Obviously, talking about from a Schneider perspective, he doesn't strike me as the kind that would view it like that. But there's certainly general managers that you could think would look at a player and just go, do you know what? If it's this or another strong safety, let's just go for it and see what happens.
And the other thing is, the Jets have currently got Justin Fields as their quarterback. It's not, they don't really have a great situation going on here. I'm sure that in that building, they may well be saying, do we go and take Jackson Dart at number 7 and just go with that? I think that's a hard sell, but you may well end up going in the top 10. And they may think, look, ideally, you take Howard in round 3, and that'd be a fair place to take him. Have the Jets got a round 3? I think they gave it away for Devontae Adams. So if they haven't got a round 3, or they haven't got an early round 3, you ain't getting him. So if you then think, do you know what? We really want this guy to be in our building. We may just take him at the top of round 2. And also, you've got to think about the competitive and the culture and the huge culture shift that needs to change at someone like the Jets. And he would help provide that. So I think that's just that's the team that I'm just throwing out there to keep an eye on with Will Howard. But he may go a bit earlier than people think. Walter Nolan, defensive tackle at Ole Miss, extremely talented player, and people like him a lot. And I think Lance Zierlein has him as like the 5th or 6th best player in the draft. So that again, it's not new news. But if you look at a lot of other rankings, he's like 43rd, 30th, 38th, something like that. Well, the feeling on him is very talented. Some love him, some hate him. Needs to be more consistent, but character is what is going to potentially knock him and might keep him in. I don't think for that reason the Seahawks will take him, but it's something to monitor. I feel like his range is extremely broad. Like someone could take him in the top 20 because of the talent, or he could sink into round 2 and last a long time. But he's somebody who's got like a very broad range. One person I spoke to said none of the quarterbacks in this draft have got a first round grade in their eyes, which I'm not surprised about because I haven't given anybody a first round grade either. They went a step further and said Cam Ward is a 3rd rounder and that Shedeur Sanders is a 2nd rounder. And it looks like Cam Ward's going to be the 1st overall pick. I still can't believe that he's going to be the 1st overall pick. That I find it staggering, but we'll see how his career develops. with the Titans, but that grade is not given out lightly, and I don't think it was the only person saying round 3 for Cam Ward.
Yeah, man, I'd certainly rather use my second round pick on Will Howard than the first overall pick on Cam Ward.
Yeah. I agree with that. I'd probably, if I was the Tennessee Titans, just think I'm going to build a roster for the first time in a while, and then I'd have got a stopgap or something, and maybe done what the Jets may do if they don't, if they draft a quarterback in round 2, round 3, or one of these other teams that are going to do that. I think that's what I would do this year, and just sort of take this as like a building process. But looks like they're going to take Cam Ward in first overall, and like I say, some people think it's a day 2 grade. Players I heard good things about. Malachi Starks. He could be an option for the Seahawks at 18, I think. But I've heard a lot of good things about him. He's another player, very talented, high character. I think he is a Seahawk type. And I think with Egbuka and him. Also, here's another thing to point out. Grae Zable might not be there at 18. Because there might be, you've got the Bengals, you've got the Cardinals, you've got the Colts. There are teams that could take Grae Zable before you're on the clock. And if that happens, I think they are going to take a different position. So that's just something to point out. And Malachi Starks is rare in that he can play from deep and still make plays. There are not many safeties who can do that. There are not many safeties who can do who have his superpower. So he's not Earl Thomas, but neither is he a million miles behind that. Danny Stutzman got a good review from the people I've spoken to. Linebacker at Oklahoma, described as potentially a second rounder. I haven't heard that anywhere else. I've only ever seen round 3 grades for him. And Billy Bowman, the safety at Oklahoma, also got a good review as a potential third round pick. But I think there's some mixed opinions on him. And then there was another player that I heard something positive about, who I don't like at all, Adam. And that is Deion Walker, the Kentucky defensive tackle. I do not like him at all because of his weird body shape, and his draft process has been weird. And I don't think he played very well last year, but he was somebody that was brought up as being liked. So there we go. So that's all of the stuff I've got to say. I'll just sort of finish with this, and we'll wrap things up because we've done over an hour. My interpretation of all this, don't be shocked if the Seahawks go for a pure best player available pick at 18, and that it isn't an offensive lineman, and that they've wait to day 2 for the O-line. Number 18 could be a receiver. It could be a Mika Egbuka. I wouldn't bet against it being Golden either, Texas, but could be a receiver. If Malachi Starks is there at 18, he could be the guy that they take. Lots of defensive tackles will be drafted in the first 3 rounds that end up becoming long-term starters. That's a prediction. And if the offensive line isn't great at the top end, it might be that the Seahawks and other teams wait on the depth and the value and focus on specific details like scheme and fit and stuff like that. Have you got any thoughts on that, Adam, before we go to the Super Chats?
No, it's just there's so much information to take in. I don't know how you'll manage to keep it all in your head and do your full-time job. I was just trying to look up if Danny Stutzman sounds like a board member at my synagogue, so I was looking to see if there's any Jewish heritage, but sadly not. I don't think down in Oklahoma there doesn't appear to be much going on there, so I was slightly distracting myself by doing that. But I don't know. I feel like we have these conversations every week, and I'm loving it because I'm learning so much. But I'm convincing myself to take this position and now that position, and what do I think about this guy and that guy? And, oh my goodness, it's just overload, and this off season is just way too long, man. And the draft just needs to be like mid-Feb and just get it out the way, because we could do this. We could do this in 2 weeks. We don't have to wait till April, whenever. Yeah, and it's just going to make you watch more tape on guys that you think you've written their grade down in Sharpie, and then someone tells you something, and you get something different. It's like, my friend Stu, who I do my pod, he works with in bookmaking, and he hears something about a horse that you think, well, there's no chance, and you have a look at the odds, and like, he's 25 to 1. No, he's a real dark horse, and he made into glue the day after his racing. But it's you just never know with this stuff. It's an absolute information overload, and let alone having to deal with free agency grades after from people. I mean, I get it. If you're paid and you have to write an article on grading a free agency, then good on you. But these people that are treating it's an unfinished essay. The draft is part of free agency, and I don't understand why so many people are getting dragged into talking about how free agency is. Big blue mark. It's this grade on your free agency. What are we doing? Like it doesn't finish until basically the 1st of May. Just shut up. So thank you for not asking me to do that at least, because that really would have frazzled my brain even more.
Well, I think before just going to the super chats, what I would say, I'm sort of like looking at the board right now and the list of players and the order of the teams. I think that, and again, I always reserve the right to change my opinion on this. I think from the Seahawks perspective, if Jahdae Barron was available, I think he would be an option. If Malachi Starks was available, he would be an option. If Colston Loveland was available, he would be an option. I'm not sure about Will Johnson just because of the injuries, but Mike McDonald will know more about him than me. So if they really like him, they will take him. Egbuka, Zable, Golden, maybe Emin Wari, Ezeruaku, complete wild card, Elijah Arroyo. I think they're the names that I would focus on maybe the most right now from a Seahawks perspective. But that's my opinion, not anything that's sourced. Right, let's get to the super chats. Noah says you should do a stream with Hawks Nest. Noah, thanks for the super chat. I'm happy to. If people want to ask me to go on their streams, I'm happy to do it. I very rarely say no. Martin says, do you think we go defensive end with our pick at 18? I have a feeling that's what we're going to do. I'm not sure, Martin. I mean, it's an option for sure. I don't think they will go with Mike Green because of character. I don't think Michael Williams' tape consistency health means that he would be a good idea. And then if the other edges you're looking at there are probably Ezeruaku. They may take him. I think he's very much a fit for them. But is he a better grade than some of the other players? So I'm not sure at 18. It might be something more day 2, day 3 that they pick up an edge rusher there. And I think they really like the guys they've got as well, by the way. And they have signed DeMarcus Lawrence. This one's, it is what it is. Thank you very much, Rob, for all your articles that I have been reading for many years. Thank you. And thank you, Adam, for your contribution. And say hello to Robbie for me when he gets back. Much love. Thank you. Definitely will. Really appreciate that. Chris says, what are your top zone blockers like in pass protection? Chris, my preferred zone blockers that I talk about the most, their pass protection is very good. I've been watching the tape. I'm definitely not. I'd flag it if I was concerned by it. Garth says, love this content. Hope to see Robbie soon as well. Completely agree with that. PGZ206 says, thoughts on Jihad Campbell at 18? I love Jihad Campbell. He's a fantastic player. He's one of the best players in the draft. But Mel Kiper was doing a podcast the other day, and one or two other people have said this, that the torn labrum injury could send him into round 2, and that it's a problem. So it doesn't mean he's never going to play in the NFL, but it might mean that he don't play as a rookie. And I don't think the Seahawks are going to take him at 18 if that's the case. They won't take a player at 18 if he's injured.
Do you think teams are getting better and sources are getting better at being honest when it comes, not honest, but truthful when it comes to these player injuries? Because there was a lot of chat about Fatanu last year, wasn't there? Yeah. Knee, and then there was a lot of pushback. No, what are you talking about? Didn't play a snap, I don't think, in the season, did he? It feels like with that sort of stuff that people are quite cautious about putting information about injuries out unless it's pretty solid. So that does concern me a bit with him.
It does concern me with him. I suppose you couldn't hide it. It was going to get out. And I think they've tried to get ahead of it by saying he needs this surgery and damage limitation mode kicks in. The thing with Fatanu was Tony Pauline broke that news. Like, people criticize Tony all the time for inaccuracies, but he was the first one to say that. I think he was the first person to say in an interview that I did with him, actually. It was like no one had ever mentioned that. And then it came out and it was talked about a bit more, and it kind of emerged a little bit. And then, like you say, he didn't play. He fell a little bit in the draft, went a little bit later than expected, didn't play it down for the Steelers. So whether it's people being more truthful or not, or whether it's just in this case, it had to come out because it was such a significant injury. You couldn't hide it. And it probably also helps explain if they think he's going to fall, here's why he's going to fall. So it's not a big embarrassment for the player on the day and having to say afterwards, oh, yeah, he's injured. It's like, well, he would say that, wouldn't you? No, if they say it 2 months before the drafts, then or 6 weeks before the draft, then it's a different kettle of fish. So I would have loved, I think he would have been a definite option at 18. I don't think he is because of this labrum injury. Dogzilla Monster says, is there a way to buy draft picks? I don't think there is. They could always acquire Kirk Cousins maybe, but the Falcons, that was a great plan from Curtis, but the Falcons don't seem to be in any mood whatsoever to do that kind of trickery to save some money. So I don't think there's going to be any way to buy any draft picks. And Chris H with no message, but just sending us a super chat in there. So there we go. Thank you to all those super chats. Thank you to everybody who's watched. The numbers have been very good. And we'll see how much of that feels like it. See if it just comes true, I suppose, Adam, to see how much of that was accurate or not in a few weeks' time, in 4 weeks' time.
Counting down. I have got one little question for you.
Go on.
We spent a lot of time discussing on this show Geno Smith moving on, and the most likely person to fill that would be Sam Darnold, to a point where it almost became a fait accompli that, one was in, one was out, and that was going to happen. And I don't feel that in that conversation, we actually discussed like what anyone thinks of Sam Darnold as a player. It doesn't overly matter, I suppose, in the sense that it's not a huge contract. It wasn't, didn't have to give anything up to get him apart from a bit of money for 1 to 2 years. But what do you think about Sam Darnold as a player? Because there's a lot of people that are just inserting this guy that is going to be good. Everything's going to be cooking. He can do what he wants. But I'm a naturally pessimistic person when it comes to sport. That's just lived experience for me, unfortunately, that has molded me that way. There's part of me that worries if it's a Case Keenum situation going on. He had 1 good year out of 7 or 8, but he was in a good situation now. And I don't know, unless I've missed chat about how good people think Sam Darnold is, it doesn't feel that there's been any discussion really about him more than just the story about how he's ended up here. I
think it's pretty much, I know there's been a lot of talk about development recently, and I suppose, given where he came from, that has to be some degree of that, given the season he had with Minnesota. But I still think he's kind of the same player that we saw at USC, which was, I think he had something like 13 interceptions in his final season at USC. And it was lots of big plays or lots of, throws downfield that came off, but also a lot of turnover-worthy plays and actual turnovers. And I think what we saw with Minnesota was the best example of that being managed, in that there was a few more big plays and they managed to put a little bit of a lid, not too much, because he still had quite a few turnover-worthy plays on those kind of throws. But I think that's what he is. I don't think he has as strong an arm as Geno Smith, so he's not going to be able to muscle some throws in there. I don't think we're going to see quite the, Geno would have some wow throws, every now and again, where you thought, what a physical play.
Thing is, no one ever spoke about those on social media, so you would never have known that.
Exactly.
Like they just went completely under the radar, so it's difficult to actually see when those happened.
And that's sarcasm for our American listeners there. The thing with Darnold is he has big plays, but different big plays. Like he will have the play that won the game in Minnesota is not, that's kind of like, how has he done that? But it's not so much the physical quality as he's kind of he takes his chances. He takes some shots. He's a bit of a gunslinger in that regard. And when it comes off, he can look great, but there are going to be some mistakes and some errors. So that's what I think he is. I think he's extremely unlikely to be the answer for the Seahawks. But until they have the answer, I think this is fine. And I don't think he will be Case Keenum to the extent that I don't think he's going to come in and just completely collapse as the starter in Seattle. He might not have 34 touchdowns this year, and he might not win 14 games, but could he get 28 touchdowns, 14 interceptions? That's still more than Geno had a year ago. Yeah, I think that's possible. So I think you've basically just got a slightly younger bridge with a bit more upside to be something a bit more long-term. It will allow the Seahawks to be competitive whilst they're still looking for some potential replacement. And I still think they will draft a quarterback at some point in this draft. And it may be that quarterback is drafted and they bring him in, and this time next year they're competing for that job, or they've taken that job. We'll see. But I'm content with him as essentially a bridge plus. I think Geno was an older bridge plus, and I think Sam Darnold is a younger bridge plus. But all of these options are better than Daniel Jones or Aaron Rodgers or stuff like that. So I think to pivot from Geno to Darnold and get the third-round pick, I'm happy with it. And yeah, as a player, I think we're going to see some boom and bust at him. I think we're going to see some, wow, what a play. He's won that game. Amazing. And then the next week he might have 3 interceptions and we're going, oh my word, what is this? So that might be what our experience is with Sam Darnold.
I was actually at that game that he won at Husky Stadium for USC, that only loss in the regular season they had. And it was my 3rd consecutive game at Husky Stadium, my 3rd consecutive loss. And I saw them lose to Vernon Adams the year before, maybe 2 years before, for Oregon. And I'd never seen a quarterback like that. And I just was sure that Vernon Adams was going to be like the best player ever, but that didn't turn out that way. And the other game was, oh my goodness, what was his name? They lost to Arizona State in the pouring rain. Siler Miles wasn't available, and they had this other guy who was a complete bum. So I'm 0 for 3 at Husky Stadium and banned forevermore by people that work on KJR, unfortunately, from ever setting foot back in there for a game, because I was there for their only loss in that regular season to USC.
Well, I'm unbeaten at Husky Stadium, Adam.
Are you really?
Yes, I am unbeaten at Husky Stadium, but I've got a crap record at Lumen Field. So, so maybe I should be banned from there.
My only loss at Lumen Field was the Greg Olsen game in 2015, when we deep down, we knew that was the end of all of it. They'd lost to the Bengals the week before, just scraped by against the Lions with the punch out on Megatron. I was at that game as well. And that felt a bit iffy. Then the Bengals game, which was they blundered a huge lead. And then that Greg Olsen game where deep down we all knew that was the end of the run.
Yeah, I remember that well. I mean, the euphoria, the late night euphoria of Cam Chancellor punching the ball out, even though it was a crap performance. The blowing of the Bengals game, I can remember very well. Because I remember thinking during that game, oh, wow, they're back on this. They're playing really well. We're hammering the Bengals here. And then
Thomas Rawls had like a 70-yard run.
Yeah, and then like you say, the Panthers game where like, everyone just wanted to fall out with each other because they cocked it up at the end. Yeah. Oh. Long time ago, that now, 10 years. So there we go.
Where does it go, Rob? Where does it go?
Yeah, it goes too quickly. Anyway, I've got to drive to Heathrow Airport in 2 hours to catch a plane. So and that's a long drive for people who know that I live in the north. And how far away are you from Heathrow?
About 40 minutes. You could have crashed on. We could have done an in-person pod. What a thrill that would have been for the listener.
You might have not been able to handle my kids, unfortunately.
Perhaps.
We would have been too excited, but especially because you have a dog, so they would have been incredibly excited about that. Anyway, big thank you, Adam, for putting up with me sitting here again.
I love it. I love it. I learn so much. I'll do it every any time, any place. I'll be there. I love it.
And I will still be blogging while I'm away because we're not going. Typically, I go somewhere warm at this time of year, but we're going somewhere very cold instead in Sweden. And I've just got a feeling that in the evenings when the kids are asleep, I'll need something to do, and that will either be having an old fashioned in the bar, or it will be writing, or both. So we will see. So I will do something next week, but stay tuned to SeahawksShopBall.com. We are 15 subscribers away from 9,000 subs. And I've been kind of trying to get up towards 10. So if we could get up to before the draft, so we could get up to 9 today, that would be fantastic. 15 subs away from 9,000. So if you have enjoyed this, then subscribe. I've checked again this, and about 44% of you watch the videos and you don't subscribe. So do us a massive favor. Just give us a sub. Just give us a little subscription, and then you won't miss anything, and it helps the channel. Also, if you could like the video and leave a comment in the comment section, just write some nonsense if you want. Just go Seahawks, go whatever, anything like that. That would be great. Chris has said he sent a last-minute super chat in. I've not spotted that, so I'll come to it very quickly. Minding the Darnold contract, are the Hawks better taking a later-round development quarterback prospect or an early NFL-ready one? I think it doesn't really matter. I think, if they like, as far as I'm concerned, if they think Dart or Shook are the guy, you take them. And if you think they're the guy and they're at 18 and you think this is our franchise, you take them. If they don't think that, and they think Milrow or Leonard can be developed to be that, take them. Same for Ewers, same with Howard, same with McCord, same with any of these guys. If you believe they can start, take them. If you don't believe they can start, you don't take them. It's simple as that, really. So I think they will take somebody, but I've no real preference either way. Chris, thank you for that. Much appreciated for all those super chats and for everybody who's watching. Great numbers again. Like I said, subscribe. SeahawksDraftBlog.com. Give the video a like. Leave a comment in the comment section. Until next time, bye for now.